People tell you who they are, but we ignore it because we want them to be who we want them to be. That's Don Draper, Mad Men, and welcome to Never Start Over Again, and this is your weekly reset. My name is Rickard, and quickly, this is why I made this podcast and why I also renamed our old podcast Escapist Corner to whatever this is. So I was kept on looking like for a podcast for years now, a podcast that I could listen to on Monday morning when I was going to work or before I started kicked off my week, and that would put my head into the right space and maybe shift my thinking a bit, maybe motivate me a bit. And I just couldn't find anything. So I figured out, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to have a weekly podcast that's going to come out every Monday morning to people that feel like they don't want to start over again. And the name for the podcast comes from that motto and realization of like that, you know, everything really great or good or results come by simply keep on going and not starting over. So never start over again. And that is the job that we have at Escapist. This is the job I have also as a mentor, is to have people keep it on doing the most important thing right now and putting the first things first. And in this first episode, we're talking about identity and that Don Draper quote that I started with. So because most people listen to this as advice about how to read people, but I was thinking about something else entirely. So I asked AI for a great story about someone who who was completely misread by the world for years, and something that came up was also something I've been listening to on a history podcast about a famous author called J.R.R. Tolkien. You probably heard about him, Lord of the Rings, and so on. He was a professor at Oxford. Maybe you knew that, maybe you didn't. And he was a specialist in medieval languages, in Old English, Old Norse, Finnish, and Scandinavian languages, if I'm not mistaken. And his colleagues really respected him as an academic. He was a serious man. He was a careful scholar. And that was the map they had about him. And it was not really wrong. But it was really only 20% of the picture of who Tolkien actually was. Because for over 17 years, he'd been writing, in the margins of exam papers, like notes and words, and he started to build like a small world that didn't exist yet. It was not really a story, but he started to write, his own languages from the ground up. He built an own mythology that was 1,000 years old, and he invented like all these characters, of course, but I think the characters also intervened with the languages he created. And he did it just because he wanted them to exist. There was nobody really asking for it to happen. And he wasn't really writing them because he wanted to publish a book, but he felt an urge to do something. And it was just not, it was just something he could not do. And many of his closest friends, the Inklings, that was a literary group that he met with every week, like many of them thought he was wasting his time, but one of his best friends, Lewis, or C.S. Lewis, pushed him for years to actually finish the book. But most people just didn't care. And the academic world had a label for him, and the label wasn't wrong, but they just didn't have the room for what he was actually building. And when The Lord of the Rings was finally published, and it was rejected first and so on, because they told him it was too long, it was too strange, it was too uncommercial, but it became the second best-selling novel ever written, with over 150 million copies sold. And all that started with scribbling notes in the margins of exam papers in a language that nobody really asked for. And it was driven entirely by an incentive structure that existed only inside his own head. And he really never started over. He just kept on working on the process. And he was relentless for years doing that. And if this sounds familiar, then it's because it is. One of my late years passion has been also game theory, and the actual academic discipline of game theory. And there are many good podcasts about that, YouTube channels, and there's a principle that it all kind of comes back to, and it's the incentives you build around a system, and that determines the behavior that will come out of it. It's not the rules, it's not the intentions, but it's the incentives that are built in. And if you change what people are rewarded for, and you start to change everything they do automatically. And that is where we see a lot of like unwanted actions, unwanted disruptions, because we haven't really thought about what the incentives have been when we created those. And I think it's the same thing when it comes to your identity. The incentive structure you build around who you are determines whether you keep on going or if you stop. If your identity is built on external incentives like approval, recognition, other people's understanding of what you do, then you will stop every time those incentives disappears. As soon as somebody looks away, you will quit. So you will quit every time somebody cannot categorize you, and every time a label doesn't fit. So yeah, we quit. But if the incentive is internal, and if it's simply who you are and not what people think of it, then there's nothing really there to restart. The behavior continues because the identity is stable. And Tolkien didn't need Oxford to understand what he was building. The incentive wasn't their approval, and it never was. And yeah, I'll be honest with you about something also. And if you would ask 10 people who know me and what I do, you would probably get 10 different, completely different answers. Some people would say I run a gym. Some would say I'm a coach. Some would say I'm a mentor. Some would say I do fitness. Some would say they have really no idea. If you would ask my kids, they have also little idea. My wife asked me also this week, like, we had to fill in something like, what is it that you do? Like, yeah, entrepreneurship, development, I write, I create. So you will get different answers from all the different people. And I guess like in the past it used to bother me, but I wanted to be understood, and I think many of us want to be. And I wanted to be as clear as possible for people to understand, but I've stopped trying to correct the picture that people have, and I think people eventually start to get a more full picture. And correcting is usually never really the right way to do it. I can explain as much as I can, but yeah, people have to. I cannot change what people think, and sometimes, yeah, I mean, maybe I don't know really what I'm building and what I'm doing, and I don't think that is a problem. I think it's a part of the process. I'm working on many pieces at the same time, and I'm trying to do something good for as many people as possible. And I just have set the determination on, never starting over. So if I go back to the Don Draper quote that I started with, people tell you who they are, but we ignore it because we want them to be who we want them to be, right? But what it doesn't say, what I think is the real thing underneath it, is that we do the same thing to ourselves. We tell ourselves who we are through our behavior every single day, and then we look away because we want ourselves to be something more legible, something other people understand, more finished, more understood. Tolkien told himself who he was every evening for 17 years in the margins of those papers, in those notebooks, and in the invented languages nobody asked for. He was building the incentive structure from the inside out, and when the world finally showed up, it had no choice to accept what had already been built. And you don't need permission to be who you already are. You just need to stop waiting for the world's categorization system to catch up and put the labels on you. So I have one action for you this week, and it is to write one sentence. And it's the sentence is, I am someone who ... And you want to write something that you want to be. Something, your identity basically. And whatever it is a fact and something that you don't want to be restarting. And you can put this sentence somewhere where you see it every day. It's not there for a motivation or so. It's more just a reminder to see that you're pulling in the right direction of who you want to be. That is it for today's podcast and for the Never Start Over podcast first episode. If you found this interesting, give it a like, share it maybe to someone that you think should listen to this. And I'm also always happy for any type of feedback on these shows. So never start over again. Have a great week. Happy Monday. Bye.